Hi, I'm Bruce Pattinson from the Untitled Education Centre, and thank you for watching today's video. We really hope you enjoy these videos and that they teach you something new. If they do, please give us a like down below on the button and let us know. If you have any questions, don't forget you can contact us through the channel or through the website, and don't forget to visit our website unitedleducationcentre.com.au. There you'll find all the lecture notes for these videos. You'll find student notes, teacher notes, you'll find old exam papers and things that will help you do your best in your studies. We hope you enjoy today's video. Please enjoy it. Hi, Bruce Pattinson from Untitled Education, outside the MI6 building in London. What a perfect way, with its James Bond connections and all those spy stories, to begin our lecture on After the Bomb. If you think countries didn't take security seriously after World War II, you're sadly mistaken. You can see here, with all the security around this building, that certainly security and personal and public defence was taken very seriously. The Second World War created the following Cold War and a sort of worry and concerns about global security that was very important. Now we're going to go and look at some of the literature. After the bomb, or the Cold War. Let's talk about the Cold War and the origins of the Cold War first of all. World War II ended at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, basically, for most of the world, when the atomic bomb fell, and it started a whole new change in social mores and attitudes. Prior to the bomb, the arms race wasn't so touched, and post World War II, attempts were made to resurrect conservative values, but the world had changed so much. After that drum bop, the first one called Little Boy and the second one called Fat Man. Originally, about 85% of people agreed with the Americans dropping the atom bomb, the American population, but later events proved that they weren't all that impressed because the propaganda had led them to believe that that was the only way to finish the war. We don't call it the atomic bomb anymore, we certainly call it nuclear, but it was the feeling that the world could be destroyed city by city with these gigantic bombs that led to the fear and the hysteria of the Cold War over communism. So what was the Cold War? How did it start, and what literature evolved from it, and why, is the question we're going to ask today. After the United States dropped that first atom bomb, everything changed dramatically. The Russians, of course, raced to get their own nuclear weapons, and they did race to get those nuclear weapons and were very successful. The Cold War split the world in two. It was Russia and the communist regimes on one side, and America and the democratic capitalist nations on the other. War was not necessarily a military encounter. It was fought on ideological, economic and diplomatic grounds, with the use of propaganda and occasional force, usually in emerging nations, such as the Korean War. The split and division in the world wasn't restricted to post-World War. England's wartime Prime Minister Churchill expressed anger, and the Americans went ahead with the Truman Doctrine, giving aid to countries that were against communism, and the Marshall Plan gave aid to lots poorer nations. In 1948, it reached a crisis point when Stalin decided to enact the Berlin blockade, and the free countries of the world had to drop food into West Berlin. Stalin eventually backed down in 1949, but the world was truly divided, and even more so late in 1949, when Mao Zedong, the communist dictator, took over in China. Soon after, the Korean War started, and that was a flashpoint as well. China and Russia became closer together after that point against the free nations of the world. 1952 saw American advance again with the technology with the hydrogen bomb, but 12 months later, Russia catch this, and it became a point where the arms race was increasing to such and causing such great tension in the world, everybody thought there would be World War III and end the war. In the 60s, the tensions increased with the building of the Berlin Wall. It was a very visual symbol of the divide between the superpowers until 1989, when it came down due to the Ronald Reagan pressure on the communist regimes. The Cold War produced a climate of fear which shows through in the literature, especially in the Soviet bloc, where the government controlled every aspect of life. All forms of culture and propaganda in those communist states became controlled and documented. There was no creativity, no freedom. Propaganda became explosive on both sides. The leaders saw the battle as a kind of ideological or holy war where people were very connected to each other. Anti-communism became something of a hallmark of American politics with McCarthyism, and communists were persecuted completely in that country. And they thought they were infiltrating government. Compulsory military service was made. The Vietnam War began. It was extremely unpopular. National service was in, where people had to go and fight. Fear of the Cold War and the ramifications of that showed through in the literature very decisively and concisely. There were lots of spy stories came out. There were lots of stories about Armageddons. There were lots of post-war nuclear stuff. It was a very, very real living thing in literature as it was in the world. And literature reflected the world quite concisely in that time. During the 70s, tension eased with the policies of détente, where people tried to reduce weapons, but it was Ronald Reagan, the great American president, who effectively ended negotiations over it and increased his own military presence. The failing Soviet communist empire couldn't cope with that. Mikhail Gorbachev came to power. He was committed to ending the arms races. His economy was in ruins and his people were suffering. The old barriers broke down. Perestroika and glasnost came, and resources became directed away from the military and into other things. Reagan now entered some treaties with the Soviets, and the Cold War was sent to end with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the fall of the Berlin Wall was a symbol, and you'll read it in all the literature, how that wall was a symbol of the divide between great countries. It's very important to remember that those times were extremely conflicting and full of tension, and affected the average person very much. And we can see that reflected in the literature that we're about to study. Any of that Cold War literature, or as we call after the bomb literature, is certainly very prevalent. Books like Hiroshima are still popular today, and you'll see lots of spy stories. Jean le Carré and all that sort of fiction came out of that Cold War presence. We'll go on later to talk about some of the literature explicitly, especially The Spy Who Came In From the Cold. But for now, that will give you enough background. Look at the images. They also reflect what we're talking about here. So I'm Bruce Pattinson from Untitled Education Centre. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.